He's a man of strong Christian faith, and he is appalled by the allegations. And I suspect now that he's, as it were, banished to the sort of open prison somewhere on the Sandringham estate. He will be sensing the need to give duty of care. This man is a broken, finished man at best. I would strongly believe that he would very much like him to testify, but knows that to stand up and say that is a hiding to nothing.
Jonathan Dimbleby, a biographer and friend of King Charles. Welcome, Jonathan.
Nice to be here.
Great to have you. There are, of course, reports today accusing Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor of sharing another official document with one of his business contacts, but we've seen a week of negative headlines and revelations. How concerned will the King be about this and all the allegations?
It would be astonishing if he wasn't concerned, appalled by the allegations, and of course affected in his role as monarch as well, because the headlines are all about this, which, you know, no institution wants that, and he is trying to do and is doing an extraordinary job in his role as head of state. And
do you think he personally will be feeling that pressure?
I think that he will be feeling, his emotions will be, and he's very good, as it happens, at kind of withstanding pressure. He's had a lot of pressure. You know, he's been around a long time. However, I think that he will be feeling the pain of this. People have to remember, when they just think of him or Andrew, what is in his mind. Look at he and the Queen. Their constant concern about those women who've been sexually violated, those who've been ill-treated. The Queen was, I think, just yesterday doing that. He really deeply cares about that. He's a man of strong Christian faith, and he is appalled by the allegations.
Do you think he will also, though, have concern from his brother? I mean, it is his brother. What kind of emotional toll does this have on him personally?
Well,
it is his brother we're talking about.
It's a good question. He took very tough action back in October when he stripped him of his title. He was kicked out of the Royal Lodge at Windsor. He takes that role as the most important part of what he does. But he's a brother. Now, they may not be that close, but he's nonetheless a brother. And I suspect now that he's, as it were, banished to the sort of open prison somewhere on the Sandringham estate. He will be sensing the need to give duty of care. This man is a broken, finished man at best, regardless of what may happen, because of the combination of the allegations on the sexual front and the allegations put so cogently by Gordon Brown that he actually betrayed the nation by sharing secrets with another individual, state secrets, government documents, let alone the fact that it was also that man. We
should repeat, of course, he denies strenuously those allegations.
No, that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, and then there's the pressure put on him because, you know, people want to see a solution to this, and people always want solutions, and they want instant solutions. So people say, well, he should tell him he's got to go to the Department of Justice. He's got to go there and testify. Well, you know, that would be spitting in the wind.
Well, let's have a listen, because, of course, we all know that famous interview, infamous interview that, as he was then, Prince Andrew gave to Emily Maitlis on Newsnight. This is what he said about testifying back in 2019. Let's have a listen.
You seem utterly convinced you're telling the truth. Would you be willing to testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked?
Well, I'm like everybody else, and I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so.
Well, he said that under a cough. He would be duty-bound to do so if the legal advice said so. Should he go, do you think?
Well, I think he should go, but there's not a cat in hell's chance that he will go, because his lawyers, if he's got decent lawyers, I presume that he does have, will say you do not go there and testify, but you might perjure yourself. If you perjure yourself, you will be charged and you might end up in an American jail. So
we had a congresswoman on Newsnight this week who said the King should direct his brother to come to the US and answer questions, she said. Is he being assertive enough with his own brother? Should he be saying, you must go?
I don't think there's any point in him doing that.
Why not?
He would be ignored, because telling him he would go, he'd be ignored. They're not. He hasn't taken an awful lot of notice of the values that the king has represented for a very long time. He's his own man, and unfortunately he seems to have behaved, if the allegations have any credence, extraordinarily badly.
So he has followed his brother's instructions so far.
Okay, let us. Well, he didn't have much choice. You know, it was his house.
But could the king say, "You don't have much choice here. You must go"?
He could say that, and he wouldn't go, as I've just indicated. And also, then the king's left in this absurd position. Twofold, I suppose. One is, it might be, if there are criminal trials and he is at the top of the legal system, quite a disconcerting position to be in, to have sort of said, you've got to go and testify. More pertinently, I think, people then say, well, you've been ignored. You are very strong. So what's the next step? You kick him out of Sandringham. You put him out in the street. Well, people don't think that through. I've heard a number of highly thoughtful people who seem to lose their wits about this. You can't kick him out on the street. We touched earlier on the fact of care, duty of care for someone who's broken and finished. Kick him out on the streets. What happens? I don't think he's got any money. He may have a few beans, but not very much. He's got no place. He'll be subject to constant attention. Is he going to be in the streets, by the media, and by people who are very angry? You don't know where that
just to go back to that testifying point, obviously you think he should testify, but do you think the king thinks he should testify?
I would strongly believe, I can't say for 100% certain, I would strongly believe that he would very much like him to testify, but knows that to stand up and say that is a hiding to nothing.
When the palace put out their statement saying the king was ready to support the police, the statement included the following: Their Majesty's thoughts and sympathies have been and remain with the victims of any and all forms of abuse, as you were saying. Newsnight has had many of these victims of Epstein's abuse on the programme.
So.
Absolutely. They have called on Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to testify. If the king's thoughts and sympathies really are with the survivors, shouldn't he be publicly pushing Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor to do that?
I've also said what I have to say about that. That there's no point in saying something if you are king, however strongly, whatever he might feel, just to stand and say you ought to do it, because he's left standing high and dry at that point. And people will just say, well, it just shows he's got, he's just a, he's a fake figure. He's got no power. You can't tell someone you must go and do it. He's not his brother's keeper.
Is it an opportunity for Andrew to clear the air? Might the pressure become so much that he is forced in the end to take that decision himself and go to America? Well,
I very much hope that is the case. I mean, it is, he's indicated that if the lawyers told him, but the lawyers would tell him not to. And, you had that clip on earlier, and there are a lot of other things that we know now to be false. He's demonstrably lied and lied again. So I'm not sure that he's going to take any notice of anyone saying anything other than his lawyers say, if you want to keep out of trouble, mate, you don't go.
And what do you think, what's your sense of the impact on the family? You know what families are like, there's sometimes differences of opinion, but are they all on the same page on this?
I don't know is the answer. I'm sure that it'd be quite astonishing. They don't live hugger-mugger together. They live independent lives. It would be quite astonishing if they weren't deeply troubled by this. He's their brother, or uncle, whatever the relationship is. I think they would be very disturbed by it, and they would love it to go away, and of course it won't go away. What I think, can I say one thing about this? People say, oh, yes, well, it'll damage the monarchy will fall apart. We've got very excited very often in the past about that, and it doesn't fall apart. He does his job, and I suspect that actually, they talk about hecklers when the king's out there. What I saw, 2 cases, one heckler and a big crowd who were enthusiastically welcoming him. So I think that actually his position, he's behaved with dignity, and he's behaved with authority, and he behaves always with compassion, and that's what people see. I don't think the monarchy is on the verge of collapse as a result of this.
And yet there are, of course, people saying it's existential for the monarchy, that this controversy will affect the very foundations of King Charles and his
I've knocked about a bit. The foundations of the monarchy have been threatened way back in the 90s. It was all going to collapse then. You know, it hasn't collapsed. It bounces around, and in the end, you know, even those who think it's existential, they say, well, what do you put in its place? You know, if you could find some alternative, I'd be very open to listening to the alternative. Everyone's entitled to their views. But what's the alternative? What kind of Republican leadership would we have? Would we have one of the few people who've been kicked out from the Conservative or Labour governments? I don't know.
Jonathan Dimbleby, thank you so much for talking to Newsnight tonight.
Pleasure.